Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. I was born in 1963, which was 10 years after the Netherlands faced a major disaster. It was the biggest flood in modern history. Dikes broke, nearly 1,900 people lost their lives. It was the wake-up call for the Netherlands. Any of you who are Dutch and was born around the same time know this book, which is on the coffee table of many of our parents. It was a wake-up call where the Netherlands started the Delta works. Sea arms were closed, the dikes were brought up, and since then we feel safe and sound behind our dikes and dunes. I'm a photographer, and I was working on a project about contemporary migration in the Americas, actually, in the Americas. And I heard about, obviously I was aware that the climate crisis was pending, that the sea level would rise in the future. I saw this as an issue for the next few generations. But I came to Central America, I came to Panama, I came to these beautiful islands called Cunayala, San Blas, on the Caribbean side of Panama. And I interviewed people there, and they said, we're going to be evacuated. This is 10 years, no, this is more than 10 years ago. So I said, why are you being evacuated? And they said, the sea is coming. And I said, what do you mean the sea is coming? And they said, the sea is coming. They said that they had more frequent storms, their islands were flooded more frequently, and it was too dangerous for them to remain there, and they would be evacuated to higher ground. That was the first time I realized that this was not an issue for the future, but that this was an issue today. So it became a big project where I toured the world, looking at regions where there's an urgency, where people are facing the issue of a rising sea level. I started to explore where all this water is coming from. As you probably know, until not so long ago, the main reason for the sea level to rise was the increase of the seawater temperature. If water gets warmer, it expands. This obviously has been taken over now by the melting of the ice sheets. Greenland and Antarctica and all the glaciers which are melting. There's a lot of ice on Greenland and Antarctica, nearly 3 kilometers at the highest on Greenland. If all that ice melts, the sea level would rise 7 meters. If all the ice of Antarctica will melt, the sea level will rise 86 meters. Obviously, that is not something we will experience in our lifetime. But coastal regions, and particularly the country we are in now, which is 60% below sea level, already 1 meter sea level rise is going to have a huge effect. So there are many reports. There's a lot to be said about the whole issue, but I decided that visual proof might help to raise the issue. Bangladesh was the first stop. It sounds like a cliche because many people said, well, Bangladesh, they always have cyclones, there's always floods in Bangladesh. But the problem in Bangladesh is the delta, they have a very large delta, that often the water is not receding anymore. So that was also when I realized that you don't really have to wait for the water to come permanently into the room, but that the issue starts much earlier. Because if seawater intrudes and it doesn't recede anymore, it means that the land gets saline, that people can't grow crops anymore, that there's no safe drinking water anymore. So there are 50 million people in the delta of Bangladesh, and many have evacuated by themselves already to the major cities. The problem is that they are losing their livelihoods. They used to be farmers, fishermen. They moved to the big cities like Dhaka and Chittagong, and they don't have the work, or they can't find the work that they used to do. At the same time, the Bangladesh government is very aware. They have one of the biggest master plans to protect the coastal region. $40 billion is being invested to protect the land. But considering the coastline, the length of the coastline of Bangladesh, choices have to be made. Funny enough, many people said to me, well, these people, they should not live in the Delta. You know, I mean, it's very dangerous. There's floods all the time, and I had to remind people that me, myself, live in the Delta, below sea level. So people can't find their livelihood, so it means broken families, and many people who moved from the Delta into the cities and couldn't find work, they are coming back to the Delta to continue their life with all the risks that it takes. People are inventive. People in Bangladesh, they know how to live with the water. This is an island which is in the Gulf of Bengal. What you see used to be rice paddies, but because of the frequent seawater intrusion, they couldn't grow the rice anymore. So somebody got smart and decided that you could turn a rice paddy into a salt paddy, and that you could mine salt. What I learned from Bangladesh is that people are resilient. People don't wait for their government to act. If they can't, if the government is not doing what they should do, they will build their own dikes, they will fortify their own homes. Nevertheless, it's one of the most populated countries in the world, about 60 million people, and they don't know where to go in the end. Because if the future is unfortunately correct, it means that most of Bangladesh will be underwater. These are climate refugees. They fled to the mainland, they're in Chittagong. They lived in the neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. I spent some days with them, and the next day, the last morning I came back, the whole neighborhood burned down. According to the people, it was project developers who wanted to build a new residential area, and they set the area on fire to get the people out. It was the third time they were displaced. Well, these were the islands where I spoke to the people who said that they would be relocated. This was back in 2011. It's the land of the Kunas. The Kunas are the indigenous population of Panama. They fought in the 20s, they fought a war of independence. They didn't get their independence, but they got their autonomy. So the land that they have is the islands, but it's also a small piece of mainland which is higher up. And that's where they were supposed to be relocated to. I came back 4 years later. They were still there. The difference was that when I spoke to the people in 2011, they were like, the government is telling us that we have to leave, but we don't want to leave. This is our land. When I came back in 2015, they said, we are still here and we want to leave because it's too dangerous. So in a few years' time, people started to realize that it was for their own sake that they had to relocate. But the money for relocation disappeared, and they were still there. They're actually still there today. The land is finished now. Finally, the houses are being built. They were supposed to move this year, but it seems to really happen next year. Well, I figured if this is happening, you know, we often think that this is all happening far away, the Pacific, Bangladesh, but it is not happening close to home. So I thought if this is happening far away, it must be happening close by as well. This is the coast of East England, north of Hull. The coast is eroding, which is a completely natural phenomenon. Coasts are eroding. The difference is that because of the slow sea level rise, the currents are changing as well. So this became the fastest eroding coast of Europe. They're losing 2-3 meters a year. This was the coastal road the year before. This was the coastal road as it looked then. What I came to realize is this was, I was here in 2015. Everything you see here already doesn't exist anymore. The government gave up on the towns, and they just disappeared. They were taken by the sea. It's kind of weird because normally an island grows from one side and loses land on the other side. For some reason it doesn't happen to the island of England. See what they call Brexit. Because a thin island will remain, is the future prediction. Kiribati is far. I guess some of you know where Kiribati is. You pronounce it Kiribati. It's one of the small island states in the Pacific. It's right between Fiji and Hawaii, in the middle of nowhere. It's actually a big country. It's as big as India. The only difference is that it's mostly ocean. But it consists of a number of atolls where over 100,000 people live. It's the front line of sea level rise, of the climate crisis. It's 1 meter, maximum 1.5 meter above sea level. And people really don't know where to go. Frequent floods. High tide means a flood in Kiribati. The spring tide means a major flood in Kiribati. So people live with the water. They had a great president actually, Anote Tong. He used to be a fisherman, and he became the president of Kiribati. He would speak at any climate conference, at any UN assembly, to call for the plight of the small nations, small island nations. He actually purchased land on Fiji back in that day when I was there. The government of Kiribati sent out a press release and said we bought land in Fiji where we will bring in the future our people to. They didn't discuss this with the government of Fiji, so Fiji was not very pleased with that announcement. So they changed it into that they purchased land to grow crops to export back to Kiribati. They can't grow their own crops anymore. It's going very rapid there because the coral is bleaching because of the high seawater temperature, and the beaches are disappearing. And when the coral disappears and the beach disappears, the two buffers disappear, and the island will erode very quickly. So probably by 2050, as it looks now, or even earlier, the islands need to be evacuated. The problem is that they don't know where to go, because they are a country, they are a nation. Fiji doesn't want to have them as a nation. There's probably no country which wants to incorporate another nation. They will lose their culture, they will lose their language. And Kiribati is just one example. There are many islands, including the Maldives, Tuvalu, the Marshall Islands, which will be next, who will cease to exist. There are plans to protect the islands. The question is if we have the time to do so, and if there's the money to do so. Their only lifeline is what you see on the right, which is the international airport of Kiribati. They fortify the runway to make sure that it doesn't disappear, because there's only a ferry which goes twice a year to Fiji, and which will takes 3 weeks. When I wanted to come back to the to Kiribati, I was prevented to do so. There had been presidential elections. There's a new president, and they nickname him the Trump of the Pacific. So he's denying the issue. So we didn't want to see any journalists reporting on the issue, because he said it's just not true. So I went to the neighbors, which is the Marshall Islands. You might know better, infamous because of the Bikini Atoll, where in the 40s and the 50s the Americans performed their nuclear tests. Pretty much the same situation. The only difference is that the Marshall Islands, finally the US agreed that they would pay compensation annually to the Marshall Islands, and that if you Marshallese and you want to go to the US, you automatically get a green card. So the people from the Marshall Islands, they can go somewhere. This is Majuro, capital, so that's the one side of the capital, and that's the other side of the capital. This is high tide, so you know, I mean, I don't have to explain to you that this is quite challenging. So quite a lot of Marshallese, they actually went to the US, but the majority came back because they just couldn't get accustomed to the culture. They couldn't find work, so many of them came back to the Marshall Islands as well. Miami, you know. I guess you also, by the way, the maps that they show what happens if the sea level rises 1 meter, and the second map shows what happens if it rises 2 meters. Probably some of you are aware that Miami has a very particular problem, which is that it's built on limestone. Characteristics of limestone are that it's porous. It's good to build on, actually, but the problem is that it's porous. So Miami is unprotected. It's in a hurricane zone. I think most Dutch experts have come to Miami to try to help them with a master plan to protect Miami in the future. But everybody said so far it's not possible, because if you build a dike on limestone, the water will just go under. So Miami, during high tide, this is what they call in Miami sunny day flooding. Means that the sun is out, the sky is blue, but it floods, no rain. So this is high tide, where the seawater comes up through the drainage. When I was there was a hurricane racing towards northern Florida. Nothing new about hurricanes except that they're getting stronger, they're getting more frequent. And it shows what happens if there's no coastal protection. It's the storm surge which bulldozes the land. New York was a different story, obviously. New York had their wake-up call 10 years ago, 11 years ago already, Superstorm Sandy, where Manhattan flooded. There was a blackout A master plan was developed to protect Manhattan, just Manhattan, not Brooklyn, New Jersey, Queens, Bronx, just Manhattan. A big wall will be built, but unfortunately, until today, it still exists on paper and nothing has happened yet. So another Sandy could hit today and would cause the same issue. And if it would be a hurricane, it would be much more severe. Initially, I didn't include Jakarta, but I decided to do so because Jakarta has this incredible problem, which that the city is sinking rapidly. It's sinking northern Jakarta, where millions of people live, it's sinking 25 centimeters a year. So the couple of times I've been there, all the time they make the seawall higher so that the water doesn't come over. Take into account that the sea level is rising as well, means that Jakarta is probably the most endangered city in the world, and they developed a plan with the Dutch, obviously, to protect Jakarta. They would cordon off the sea, the bay, and they would relocate people on reclaimed land. But the plan fell through so far, financial issues, but also protests. So it's been decided that the city, that Jakarta is going to move, and they're building a new capital. Unfortunately, that capital is going to be built for the government and not for the 20 million people. So the question is, what's going to happen next in Jakarta? Well, the Netherlands was for sure not included because, as I said, I was looking for regions in the world where there's an urgency. And as I said, you know, we feel safe in this country. We are safe. There are no frequent floods. It does happen, more frequent, but not as severe as it happens elsewhere in the world. But we always looked at the best case scenario. For some reason, you know, if we talk about traffic, air safety, we always look at the worst case scenario, and that's where we adapt our laws to. Until recently, with the climate crisis, we always think that it's not going to be as bad as being predicted. Unfortunately, every IPCC report shows that it is getting worse. So, the worst case scenario for the Netherlands, if nothing happens and we don't bring the temperatures down on this planet, is that the sea level could rise by 1, 2, or even more meters by the end of the century. Which means that it took us 40 years to build the Delta Works. The clock is ticking, so if politicians are not acting, and we have elections coming up very soon in the Netherlands, we might not be sitting in Amsterdam by the end of the century. I live on a boat, which was not the initial idea, but it might prove to be a good decision. So we can do it, but I think we all need people like you, because I think sometimes democracy is failing us, because if you list what needs to happen, you're not going to win the elections in 2 weeks' time.